There are so many highly anticipated book releases coming out in 2025. I feel like there's a ton of big name authors dropping new books this year, from like Joe Abercrombie, Olivie Blake, V.E. Schwab, Rachel Gillig, R.F. Kuang, Chloe Gong, but yeah, just so many. And there's also a lot of like fan fictions being traditionally published and a lot of like debut authors coming out with really intriguing premises. Across the board, just a really exciting year for book releases, especially in the fantasy and sci-fi space. So today I wanted to go through some of my most highly anticipated ones. And I also wanted to add like a little twist to this video. So a few weeks ago, I saw Elizabeth over at Wednesdays Weeklies post this A to Z TBR challenge. And so I wanted to kind of mix that with this highly anticipated release video. So I'm going to be doing like A to Z TBR, but only with 2025 new releases. Disclaimer, I did have to cheat a little bit on a few of the letters that were towards the end of the alphabet that were really hard to find titles for that I was like actually interested in, and just like titles in general, but I use like author's name instead. But I'm super excited to talk about these 26 titles today. Hopefully there's a few on this list that you haven't heard before that you can add to your TBR as well. So for letter A, we have Alchemised by SenLinYu. Now this is the traditionally published version of Manacled, which is a Hermione fanfiction. It's also the only fanfiction I've ever read, but I was really impressed by SenLinYu's writing when I read it. It's just such like this grim, heartbreaking tale. But the synopsis for Alchemised reads, in this riveting dark fantasy debut, a woman with missing memories fights to survive a war-torn world of necromancy and alchemy, and a man tasked with unearthing the deepest secrets of her past. So it seemed like the overarching plot hasn't changed too much for Manacled. And yeah, I'm just super excited for this one. This is probably in my like top 5 most anticipated releases for the year. For the letter B, I have Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab, which is coming out in June of this year. I've actually already started reading this book, and I think by the time I edit and post this video, I will have finished it, because Tor invited like a group of people for tea with V.E. Schwab this coming Wednesday, or I guess it'll be this past Wednesday by the time I post this, and I wanted to finish my arc of this book before that. This takes place over the course of 500 years, and it's a tale of 3 sapphic vampires and a story about hunger, rage, and the ways that women are told to be satiated even when they aren't. It's like a mixture of the invisible life of Addie LaRue and Carmilla and a dowry of blood. I do really like the vampire vibe, so we'll see how the rest of the story goes. So for the letter C, I have Coldwire by Chloe Gong, and I will admit I haven't been the biggest fan of Chloe Gong's works in the past. I didn't love These Violent Delights or Foul Lady Fortune. However, I'm not sure if that was like an issue I had with her writing, or the fact that I just have a little bit of a personal vendetta against Romeo and Juliet retellings, so I definitely still want to give her new book a try, especially since it's a dystopian book and I love the dystopian genre. But the premise for Coldwire reads, while most of society lives upcountry in a virtual reality during a Cold War, an ousted corporate soldier framed for treason is on the hunt downcountry for a dangerous program, one that could clear her name and change the race to rule the world. I believe this is the first in a YA trilogy. There's not that much information about it yet. It doesn't have a cover yet, but the release date is November 4th of this year. So for D, I have Don't Sleep with the Dead by Nghi, and this is a novella that's a Great Gatsby retelling. It's also apparently queer, and I did really like this author's writing style when I read The City in Glass last year, which was like this really cool, like dark gothic story about angels and demons and memory. She has a very lyrical prose and a very kind of dreamy atmospheric feel to her writing, which I really enjoyed. I haven't read any Great Gatsby retellings before, and I'm really excited to see how like the author kind of incorporates fantasy elements into this tale. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this one a lot. Alright, for the letter E, it's The Everlasting by Alix Harrow. So this is a movie and genre-defying adventure through time, as a reluctant lady knight and a historian with dreams of being a hero will fight to rewrite their tragic fates and finish the greatest legend ever told. So this is like a lady knight story, and I think Alix Harrow did say it has some similarities to The Six Deaths of the Saint, which is a short story that I really loved. I haven't read anything from Alix Harrow besides that short story. I'd been meaning to read Starling House for like two years now, but I never got around to it. So, you know, I think The Everlasting will likely be my first like full novel from Alix Harrow. And this one is coming out October 28th, 2025. For F, we have Fable for the End of the World by Reid, and I actually did already read this one. I got the arc back actually in a giveaway a few months ago, but I still wanted to include this in the video so I could talk about it. But this is a YA dystopian romance that's been comped to The Last of Us and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I would say it's actually a lot more similar to like the first Hunger Games book than it is to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but there's so many like YA books these days series being comp to the Hunger Games that I understand they wanted to do something a little bit different. This book is also sapphic, and I was super engaged in it in like the first 75%. I will say the ending felt a little rushed to me. I feel like it just needed maybe like another 50 pages, but overall I did really enjoy the story. It feels like very old school, like early 2010s dystopia, and that was like a period of the genre that I really enjoyed, so I felt very nostalgic reading this book. And if you're someone who really enjoyed books like Divergent, The Maze Runner, The Hunger Games, Delirium, Matched, so many books, I could probably spend all day trying to sit here and listing more of them, but if you really enjoy dystopian books from the early 2010s, I think you're gonna like this one as well. For G, I have down Gifted and Talented by Olivie Blake. So I have really enjoyed the Olivie Blake books that I've read. I haven't read all of them yet, but out of the ones I have read, my favorite is probably Masters of Death. So Gifted and Talented is a standalone that comes out in April of this year, and apparently it reads like Succession with magic, but it's about these three like sibling heirs of a brilliant CEO who are all like magically gifted, and in the wake of their father's death, I think they're trying to like fight for the inheritance of this company. That's the gist I'm getting from the synopses, so I'm very excited to see how this story goes. So for H, I have down Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher, which is like a dark reimagining of the Snow White fairy tale. So I have read a few of T. Kingfisher's works. I will admit I haven't really been wowed by any of them, but I do really like her writing style, and I think she writes like gothic fantasy and fairy tales very well. And the Snow White, like original Snow White story, I feel like has a lot of really cool gothic elements that can be amped up, and I think that's what she will be doing in this reimagining, or at least that's what I hope she will be doing in this reimagining. So this is something that I'm looking forward to, and I believe this one is coming out August 19th, 2025. For I have done Immortal Consequences by Ivy Marie, who is a debut author, which is really exciting, but the premise of her book really caught my eye when I first saw it on TikTok when I was just scrolling. The premise is 6 students at Blackwood Academy, an enigmatic boarding school located at the edge of the afterlife, must compete for a once-in-eternity chance to change their fate or risk remaining stuck in purgatory forever. That sounds like a pretty cool mix of like dark academia and fantasy, and it also just has a beautiful cover. I love this cover. But yeah, doesn't that premise sound so interesting? I also feel like because there's so many big name authors coming out this year, I know like myself and a lot of people will be flocking to those titles, but I don't want the debut authors to get overlooked as well. So this is one that I definitely will try to read, but this one is out July 29th, 2025. So for J, I had to use the J in the author's name, but what I have down for this is The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. Like, you would think there'd be more books with the letter J in their title. I spent days trying to find a book for the letter J and I just like couldn't. But anyways, The Devils is actually one of my most anticipated releases of 2025. I originally had it down in the D slot, but after I couldn't find something for J, I moved it to the J slot. But The Devils features a notorious band of anti-heroes on a delightfully bloody journey. Nobody really writes grimdark fantasy like Joe Abercrombie. He does such an incredible job at it. I love the First Law trilogy. My favorite work of his is Best Served Cold, which is the first standalone that takes place in the First Law world. And I do plan on reading the rest of his books very soon. But yeah, I just think it has really complex, interesting character work. His dialogue is also super witty and super sharp, and I just love the way he writes. K, I couldn't choose just one. I had to choose 2, one of which is Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. I actually did already read that one as well because I got an ARC, and I have a full video posted on it that has a spoiler-free review as well as like some books that I think would be helpful to read beforehand. But Katabasis is about these 2 graduate students who must put aside their own rivalry to journey to hell to save the soul of their professor. That was a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. I'm so excited for more people to read it. The second K is The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig, and I do feel like romantasy is a bit of a hit or miss for me, but I really enjoyed One Dark Window when I first read it. I like Rachel Gillig's writing style a lot. It's very lyrical, very gothic and dreamy, and I do think it's going to translate well to the premise of The Night and the Moth. But The Night and the Moth is a gothic mist-cloaked tale of a young prophetess who is forced on an impossible quest with the one infuriating knight whose future is beyond her sight. I actually also got this from Orbit Books, which is the publisher, earlier this week. I guess it's just like I don't know if you can see it. Is that focusing? Is that focusing at all? Am I gonna have to, I think I'm gonna have to insert like a picture on it. Oh, there we go. But it's just like a little card that says to expect the arc, and there's also what I assume is like some form of a prophecy on this card, and then it's like a super cool just like shimmery back. Anyways, this is super cool PR, so I'm so excited. I'm just waiting for the arc to show up now, but I probably will read that one before the release date as well, which is May 20th, 2025. For L, I have Luminous by Sylvia Park. This is another debut author, and this is like a mix of sci-fi and literary fiction, but this is set in like a united Korea in the nearest future in a deeply human take of artificial life. One thing that caught my eye about this book is it's already been optioned for a movie by the same studio that's doing Pachinko on Apple TV. And anytime a book gets picked up before it's even published, it really catches my eye because I know somebody is very, very invested in the story and thinks it will do well. So I am also highly anticipating this read. But to read you like the full synopsis of the book, this is a sweeping debut set in a unified Korea that tells the story of 3 estranged siblings, 2 human, 1 robot, as they collide against the backdrop of a murder investigation to settle old scores and make sense of their shattered childhood. Oh, and this is out in March of this year. For M, I have done My Friends by Frederick Backman, and Frederick Backman is an author I really need to read more of. I've only read one of his books, but it did absolutely emotionally shatter me, and I've heard that almost all of his books do that, so you know, that's something we've got to look forward to. But My Friends is an unforgettably funny, deeply moving tale of 4 teenagers whose friendship creates a bond so powerful that it changes a complete stranger's life 25 years later. I feel like this one's probably also gonna make me cry, but yeah, like I said, I'm super excited to read all of Frederick Backman's works. For the letter N, I also did have to cheat a little bit. You would also think there's more books that start with the letter N, but there weren't really many 2025 releases that did, at least the ones that I was interested in. But for N, I'm using the first letter of the author's name, and the book I have for this is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. I haven't read anything by Nnedi Okorafor, and I've been meaning to for the longest time, and I've been seeing a lot of buzz about this book, so I think this will be a great entryway for me into her works. But in this story, a disabled Nigerian-American woman pens a wildly successful sci-fi novel, but as her fame rises, she loses control of the narrative. And this is a surprisingly cutting yet heartfelt drama about art and love, identity and connection, and ultimately what makes us human. And this book is actually already out. It came out in mid-January of this year. For the letter O, I have down Our Infinite Fates by Lauren Stevens, which comes out on March 4th of this year. This is a fantastical love story that defies death as 2 souls reincarnate through the centuries. They've loved each other 1,000 lifetimes, they've killed each other in every one. I love it when a premise just catches my eye. I haven't read that many books with themes of reincarnation, so I'm pretty excited to see how that's woven in this story. There really weren't that many new releases that started with the letter P either, so I used the author's last name, A.B. Poranek, and the book is A Treachery of Swans. This is an atmospheric fantasy based on Swan Lake, following Odile as her plan to restore magic to her kingdom gets disrupted by a murder, forcing her to beg for help from the young woman whose identity she stole. So I grew up doing ballet and I'm kind of obsessed with everything Swan Lake, so the fact that this is a Swan Lake reimagining really just piqued my interest. I also have read Where the Dark Stands Still by A.B. Poranek, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that story specifically, but I did like the author's writing style, so I'm excited to see how she writes this reimagining. So for the letter Q, I could have found a book that started with the letter Q, but I did find one titled The Bloodless Queen that I actually hadn't heard of until I was trying to put together this list. This is by Joshua Philip Johnson and is described as like a part ecological Orpheus and Eurydice myth and part gothic thriller, which I was like very intrigued by. I'm not really sure how those are going to come together, but I am curious to find out. It's an atmospheric near-future sci-fi novel about fae mysteries deep within a strange nature preserve. Yeah, like all of that sounds very intriguing to me. I hadn't heard of this author before either, but I did see that R. of Kuang actually blurbed one of his other books, which that is very promising to me. For the letter R, we have Red City by Marie Lu. So this is described as The Godfather Meets the Magicians, and it is a deadly contemporary fantasy of magical warfare, star-crossed ambition, and the pursuit of perfection at any cost, set in a glittering alternative Los Angeles. So I really love Legend. That is a YA series that Marie Lu wrote. I was so obsessed with it in middle school. I was actually changing like my Facebook pro pic to book covers of the books in this series. Mind you, not like a book-focused Facebook page, just like my personal Facebook page. I'm not really sure why I thought that was going to be a good idea, but I was obsessed with those books, and I'm really excited that Marie Lu is now writing like an adult fantasy. I think it's going to be really good. For the letter S, I have Sunrise on the Reefing by Suzanne Collins. I'm super excited about this one. This is another book that's in like my top 5 most anticipated releases. I cannot wait to see what new information is revealed in this book. I do plan on reading this in one sitting. I actually have read every single book in the Hunger Games series in one sitting the year that it came out, and for Catching Fire, Mockingjay, and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I read them all on like release date. But I just really love the series. I know Suzanne Collins will not disappoint me. For the letter T, I did count the T in the, but I have down The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri. So I guess there's also a T in the author's name if we're not counting articles. This one doesn't have a set release date yet, but it's coming out in fall of 2025. This is a standalone novel about a knight and a witch who must change the fate of magic and the world by altering the end of their story. And this is pitched as Green Knight meets the Starless Sea. I feel like there's a lot of like knight books coming out in 2025. I wonder why. I wonder if there's a reason for that, but I'm very excited for this one as well. Haven't read anything by Tasha Suri. I have been meaning to, so maybe this will be my first book by her. For the letter U, I have down The Unworthy by Augustina Bastarrica, and this is a book that I'm honestly not 100% sure if I'm gonna like, because I have read Tender is the Flesh by the same author, and that one was undeniably well written, but it wasn't like a book I could say I really loved, you know? But this premise sounded really intriguing to me. This is a literary horror work about a woman cloistered in a secretive, violent religious order, while outside the world has fallen into chaos. So this is a novella under 200 pages, and it is dystopian, and it gives us a look into cults, climate crises, and extremism colliding in a razor-sharp story. There were no books that started with V coming out in 2025, at least that I was aware of, and I also couldn't find an author's name that started with V, so I have just included a book title that has the letter V in it, but it is The River Has Roots by Mal El-Motar. This is a story about fairies and sisterhood, and I honestly don't have a very clear grasp on what the plot is about just from like the publisher synopses, but I really did like Amal El-Motar's writing, and This Is How You Lose the Time War, which she co-wrote with Max Gladstone, and so I'm looking forward to reading more of her writing in this work. For the letter W, I have down Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross, who wrote the Divine Rivals duology. But Wild Reverence is about a young goddess who must forge a path for herself, and I do believe this is a adult romantasy set in the same world as Divine Rivals. For the letter X, I wasn't gonna find a title that started with the letter X. The best I could do was Alix E. Harrow, which has an X in it. She also has a short story coming out in 2025 called The Night and the Butcher Bird. So yeah, another night story. But this one is a dystopian fairy tale that follows the town storyteller as she struggles to protect a local demon from the night hired to kill it. I believe this is a short story written as part of like the Amazon Originals collection. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, I really love The Sixth Death of the Saint, which is another Amazon Originals that Alix E. Harrow wrote, so I have high hopes for this one as well. Alright, letter Y. Once again, I had to use an author's last name. Just by the time we get to this part of the alphabet, it's very hard to find books that start with these letters. But I have down for letter Y, Brighter Than Scale, Swifter Than Flame by Neon Yang, and this comes out in May of 2025. So this is pitched as like an Asian fantasy version of The Mandalorian, and it is a queer novella about a dragon hunter finding home with a dragon queen. But I always love me an epic Asian fantasy. I will admit, a lot of the ones that came out in 2024 were disappointments, but I'm hoping that will not be the case for 2025, so hopefully I love this one. And last but certainly not least, for the letter Z, I have Bat Eaters and Other Names of Cora Zung by Kylie Lee Baker. And again, I could not find a book title that started with Z, but there is a Z in the book title, so that's good enough for me. But this comes out in April of this year, and it is an explosive horror novel about a woman who's haunted by inner trauma, hungry ghosts, and a serial killer as she confronts the brutal violence experienced by East Asians during the pandemic. I am pretty curious to see like what type of story is going to take form based on that premise, and I have heard some pretty good things about this book from early reviewers, so this is another one I have like pretty high hopes for, so fingers crossed. Alright, so those were 26 books that I'm very excited about that are coming out this year. I really can't remember like a year in recent history that has been so stacked in terms of like number of big name authors coming out with new books. There's also so many that I didn't get to include in this video since I was doing like one book per letter of the alphabet. And yeah, I'm already feeling so overwhelmed. I'm so behind on my TBR already. There's just so many good stories I can't keep up with, which I guess is a great problem to have. But yeah, I just think this is going to be a really great year of reading.